Hello, and welcome back to episode 14 of the COVID Long Haulers podcast. We share real stories from those living with long COVID, what they faced, how they're coping, and surviving. My name is Emerson, and I'm co hosting this episode today with Jesse.
Hello.
Today, we're back speaking with Noah, a 23-year-old former gymnast from South Dakota. Last month, he shared his health experiences with us, so the treatments that he tried and what has helped him improve. Today, we are looking forward to focusing on his gymnastics career that was abruptly ended by that COVID infection and to talk about the grief that has followed. Hi, Noah. Welcome back to the show.
Hi.
So, can you tell us a little bit about how your gymnastics career got started?
Yeah. Let's start at the very beginning. It started watching the Beijing Olympics in 2008 in my parents' bedroom. When I was 9, my parents brought me to this little gym called Wings Gymnastics. And then
Oh,
that's where my career started. And I was the only male competitive gymnast in my time for the whole state of South Dakota.
wow.
Yeah, it was just crazy. I feel super inspiring that I was able to put myself on a map that way. And then I started doing some recreational boys gymnastics classes. And I was like, okay, this is kind of my vibe. I did gravitate more towards the women's events just because it's kind of what I grew up seeing more of. And that's what I ended up doing in college, floor vault and high bar. Obviously, it's very different from women's gymnastics, but that's kind of how it happened. And then when I turned 16 is when I started competing. I trained 25 hours a week all through high school, on top of other activities at school my parents wanted me to be a part of. I was a part of, band and choir, and
Wow.
I did musical theater. I woke up at 6 a.m. and didn't come home until 11 p.m. basically every night for 4 years. So,
Wow.
um, just juggling the whole thing and somehow trying to be successful, but I was super resilient. If
Mhm.
I was determined to do something, I would figure it out. So then
Yeah.
I got recruited to college, and that was Monday through Friday from 8 to noon, and then Saturday from 7 to 11:30. And then we'd compete on the weekends. We do equipment moves and fundraisers. I competed, pretty successful, did all these different things. And then here I am now.
It's like a lifestyle. It's like you were
Yeah.
living
It
this.
is. It really is a lifestyle. Transitioning from something that is so consuming to
Mhm.
doing other things in life, you feel kind of lost. I feel behind.
Mm,
I was worried that I was going to feel behind even before I got long COVID.
Yeah.
right.
I was like, oh, after I retire, what am I going to do for fun?
This is what you did for fun, and it was kind of like your, for
It was
about
your
My
lack of a
job,
whole
better word,
whole
vocation. Yeah.
identity, really.
my whole identity,
Yeah.
everything I did, eat, sleep, breathe, gymnastics. It's all fun and games, and it's a thrill until it's not, until, you retire and you're like, who am I? What do I do for
Yeah.
fun?
When you're
Yeah.
forced to retire rather than when it's a choice that you've made.
Have you been able to find anything that has kind of filled that void that gymnastics left behind after you developed long COVID?
Yeah, so gymnastics was, in my mind, a job, and it was my favorite job I ever had being an athlete. I got really good at what it meant to be an athlete and what it took to be an athlete, and I really had figured out the mental game. I had a really great team and great coaches to support that mindset. And when I had that swept out from under me, I knew nothing else. That's what my whole life has been since I was a child, and I still struggle today to find hobbies and things that I like to do. I don't know exactly, what else I like to do yet. I'm still trying to figure that out. Purpose is such a big thing, and we can find purpose in any place we exist, in any capacity we exist in. So I guess I am trying to find some more things. I've taken on, the subtle craft of like coloring and journaling, and I've done a puzzle or two, and I like talking to my friends when I can and just connecting there. But there's not been anything yet that has been able to really fulfill that in the same way for me and bring me the same satisfaction. And I'm really hoping that I can find that in something. I've also thought about doing more advocacy and speaking more about my story on other platforms and other places and stuff. I have to benefit myself and the people in my community while I can. And I hope I am continually able to in the future. So maybe that's what I'll do, but we'll see.
Would you like to return to gymnastics?
I think I'd like to take on gymnastics again in some capacity. I really miss the sport of gymnastics and being able to do it every single day and to do it well. If I get better, I'd like to stay within the sport somehow, whether that's coaching or judging or giving feedback and other ways. I think I'll find a place there for that. But even college coaching has been a dream of mine for the longest time. So, if I see a day where I recover enough to support myself with a full time job, I'd really like to coach at a college.
Last month, you mentioned that you went right back to working out after your COVID infection. Can you tell us a little more about that? Was there pressure from your team to return? How did all of that go?
As an athlete in college, at least for me, and the way my team worked, it was you don't miss a workout because
Yeah.
a lot can change in 3 days, 4 days in a team. They have a list of people, and then you have to salute your routines to your coaches at practice, and whoever does the top 6 best guys get to compete, top 5 guys,
Yeah.
top 4 guys, like, those are the people who are in the lineup, and I was in the lineup on 3 events, and I didn't wanna lose my spot on the 3 events that I trained because it
Yeah.
was my senior year, my first meet of the season. I wanted to do well, I wanted to feel good, and I jumped right back into it.
Yeah.
Because I was like, "Oh, this infection wasn't that bad." So I didn't know that maybe I should rest, in between,
Right. And
for
it's
a
not
couple weeks.
something that they really talk about right now.
No.
It's of
Oh,
like,
I had no idea the implications of long COVID until I ended up with it.
and that's
Yeah.
Until I
devastating.
Yeah, I
It's
remember hearing briefly a little bit about long haulers, and I was like, "Oh, well, that sucks," but, like, what does that mean? I was like, "Oh, like, they just have some issues after they have COVID," and, in my mind, I was like, "Oh, they're still living a normal life like me, though." Which
Right.
is completely not at all
yeah,
the truth.
it's so frustrating. COVID and long COVID are so often downplayed. Before I got long COVID, I honestly had no idea how serious the long-term effects could be, and I know that I'm not alone in that. We're just not being informed and told the full truth about how dangerous COVID infections are to our health and our body.
For real.
People in power, healthcare providers, they really should be giving us all the necessary information we need to be making well-informed decisions about our health, but that isn't happening. And that is devastating and frustrating because I am certain that if we'd been given the necessary information, a lot more people would be taking precautions to make sure that they do not become disabled or do not ruin their health from repeat COVID infections. And in turn, there would be far less long haulers because we know that repeat infections, increase your risk of developing long COVID.
Absolutely. And for me, it really highlights that we put these authoritative figures on pedestals without interrogating that. I used to have so much confidence in the medical system as, quote, science until this experience where we're met with the most anti science hubris, the acceptance that practitioners don't need to be informed about the effects of COVID reinfections or how the virus is even transmitted. And I think about this a lot. If you use a computer, you're familiar with antivirus software, right? And software updates. Some professional engineer out there has recognized a new threat. The antivirus software is updated to reflect that. And you get a notification that says, hey, update your antivirus because you're not protected from the latest threats. So there's no similar mechanism in place for health practitioners to, quote, update their understanding in the system. And from what I've been told, it's totally up to the individual practitioner to educate themselves with whatever they find. It's insufficient and unacceptable.
Yeah,
Anyways, Noah, you trained for that meet that you had briefly after your infection. How did that competition go?
we show up to the meet, I don't feel right. I feel a little woozy, a little tired. And that was the last meet that I ever competed all of my events, all 3. And I
Wow.
didn't know that was gonna be the last time I did all 3.
How does it feel to look back on that meet?
When I competed at that meet, I didn't have any idea what that was gonna look like. I knew I wasn't well, I knew something was wrong, I just didn't really know what. I was still able to compete, but shortly after, everything went downhill a lot quicker, and I didn't know that was gonna be the last time I competed all of the events I trained in college. And looking back on that day is really bittersweet. I don't know if I would have liked to know that that was gonna be the last time or not. I think there's a place for both, knowing that this is the last routines you're gonna compete for your team and, that what you worked so hard for is so bittersweet. But also, I think there's a good sentiment to not knowing, because then I can look back and remember that I gave everything I had in hopes of being able to do it again. And I know that I still laid it all out on the floor. So either way, for me, kind of has the same outcome and the same feeling in the end.
I'm so glad that you can look back and feel that way, that you still hadn't declined to the point of failing at something you loved so much.
Yeah. How did it or does it still feel to have lost gymnastics? It seems that it was such a large part of your life and your identity. So I can imagine that losing that part of yourself was really, really difficult.
Yeah, gymnastics was one of the hardest things I've ever had to lose. Just because it was everything I've ever done. My only reason I felt I woke up to eat and breathe was to achieve the next thing in my gymnastics journey, and to have that abruptly stop definitely changed a lot of the way I saw myself as a person. Once you take something like that away, you have a lot to make up for. At least that's what it felt like for me.
Yeah.
I'm I'm so sorry, Noah. Honestly, this seems to just be such a common experience among us long haulers, or really anyone who's suddenly become disabled and just lost a big part of themselves. Jesse and I were talking about this recently, how a lot of us have this one thing that we love doing, and this one thing often feels like that defines who we are, that this is me. And for you, it seems that that was gymnastics. For me personally, that was my brain. Used to be so smart and I loved reading and learning and just thinking deeply about things. My friends jokingly would always say, Emerson's hobby is learning and studying. But it really was. I enjoyed learning and acquiring knowledge. And then when long COVID took that away from me, it really hurt very deeply because I felt like I didn't even know who I was anymore without that part of myself. I might not have been, an athletic person, and I know that many other people as well will know how painful it is to lose this massive part of yourself.
Emerson, you are still so, so smart. But yes, that feeling of losing the freedom to exert your physical or intellectual capabilities the way that you wish to is really hard to accept, and to not know how long it'll last. At the worst of it for me, when I was like bedbound and unable to use any screens or tolerate light or sound, I thought the actual living part of my life was over. And I mourned every trip I didn't take, every choice I made that prioritized my job over my partner, for example. Really just recognizing how much life I had taken for granted and how much more I wanted. And now, during all of this grief and loss, there were those that still minimized it or implied that all of this was anxiety or that I was choosing it in some way.
Yeah, no one goes from being an elite athlete living their best life to chronically ill in the matter of 4 or 5 months. And that's what they want for themselves, you know?
Exactly. Do you want to talk about the grief and loss that you were feeling before your COVID infection, during your COVID infection?
Sure. I mean, it is a part of my story, and this is also something that can affect you physically,
Mhm.
mentally. emotionally, like, completely. Um, I was in a relationship with someone for almost 2 years, and shortly before my COVID infection, the week of Thanksgiving, this person ended our relationship, and that was really hard for me because I felt so incredibly happy with this person,
Yeah.
and losing that person was probably one of the hardest things in my entire life so far. I
Mhm.
have never experienced grief like that. Going from loving someone so incredibly hard and loving them in the best way I knew how to at the time, to not having them, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
We know that those emotional stressors of grief, heartbreak, all that loss really dampens your immune system. And there's decades of data on that. One classic study from the University of Pittsburgh found that people who were recently bereaved, so like within the first 6 months after losing a spouse, had lower levels of natural killer cell activity, which that is a key part of your body's first line of defense against viruses, which means that they, and you in turn likely as well, Noah, are more vulnerable to infections in general. And newer research backs that up as well. Multiple studies have shown that people experiencing chronic stress or grief had elevated inflammatory cytokines and suppressed antiviral immune responses, which is generally just a terrible combination to have. So, when you think about that in the context of COVID, it kind of makes sense. If your immune system's already downregulated because of stress or loss, and then you get exposed to a virus, your body is just not equipped to fight it off properly. And that might set the stage for those lingering post viral symptoms and then long COVID. But at the same time, Noah, you were dealing with those compounding losses. You had the loss of someone you loved for years, the loss of your career, and the loss of your health. I just want to give you a hug.
Same.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. I really appreciate that. Loss and grief is the epitome of long COVID,
Yeah.
and because of the loss of this person, I have never been more distraught in my life. I lost someone very important and valuable, and then immediately after, I got a COVID infection that changed my life. It changed all the course of everything I ever wanted to do, all of my plans, all of my dreams. Everything has changed since I
Your
got sick.
long COVID is inherently loss and grief. We lose so much of who we were, who we could have been, who we wanted to be. We lose all of this to this terrible illness.
Yeah, we lose so much so fast. The stuff that we gain, it takes a little longer. So, like, even though I've learned so much from my loss and grief, it doesn't make it easier in the moment that I'm suffering. That sort of comes later in time.
It's so tough because I feel like I have become a better person since I've become
Me as well.
disabled. I think I prefer this version of myself, but I wish that I could go to university and see my friends and get my degree and do things that a 22-year-old does, but I can't, and that's kind of what's so difficult about this.
Yeah, I do really grieve and I miss the person that I was and the athlete that I was and my resiliency. I really do miss that person. But the person I am now has learned to love harder, has learned to understand people better.
You've leveled up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't think people with long COVID really give themselves enough credit for what they're going through. Even with our illness, we are still so resilient.
Yeah.
Some of the most resilient people you will ever meet is a person who has gone through a health crisis and tried to come out on the other side, whether or not it happens.
And when
And
when your
I
life is over, when it has ended, the life that you
yeah,
knew, you
yes,
know what really matters.
Yeah. It's
you
almost like
do.
your priorities are right and you don't take things for granted. You appreciate the smallest thing because you know that tomorrow is not given. You know that anything can be taken from you at any second, and it really changes
Yeah.
your perspective on life, and for me, it has made me a much more rounded person.
There's this book by Kate Bauer. The two that I've read, one of them is called No Cure for Being Human and Other Truths I Need to Hear. And the other one is called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved. She's really great. And
That's incredible. That like already sounds like poetic and just perfect. And
I highly recommend the audiobooks too. But there's a quote that I have on my screen that I see all the time. And it says, the terrible gift of a terrible illness is that it has, in fact, taught me to live in the moment.
I could get that tattooed. Wow, it's incredible. Yeah. I
I
mean,
say this all the time, but I think chronically ill people are the best
Yep.
people. Like they
you
have
know,
so much empathy for each other, and we just give so much grace to each other. That is what makes a community.
I have met so many incredible people who have told me so many incredible things that have helped me get to the point where I'm at right now. I feel full as a person now because of my community.
And you know what matters.
You know what matters. Yeah, it completely changes the way you think about everything. We got to stick together. It's not just me, myself, and I. It's all of us. Chronically ill people have to work together. And it doesn't have to just be just me with the long COVID community. I got to stand with my type 1 community too.
Yeah.
I got to stand with the other diagnosis communities that I've been given. You know,
There's so
all of
many
us.
populations that
Yeah.
we might not have what they have. Well, actually, a lot of us do have type 1 now after COVID or many
Yeah.
other diseases. But we know what it's like to be underserved in a medical system
Yes.
and to be escorted out of society, basically. Like you're just someone that needs to stay home and be sick. And it's like, well, I have more to offer the world than that, right? I have
Yeah.
more to do with my life than that.
It's so easy for other people to just see the disability and the long COVID and to think that that is who we are, that our chronic illness, our disability is our entire identity. But that's not who we are. Yes, long COVID takes so much from us. And when we are homebound or even bedbound, it's hard not to feel like long COVID and our fatigue and these other debilitating symptoms that we experience are all that we are. But despite those symptoms, we are still complete, multifaceted people who have worth, ambition, and the right to hope for better days and also advocate for real change.
We need hope and awareness starts with us. We have to cultivate it ourselves, and it may be the hardest thing you ever have to do. But if we all create awareness together and we don't stop talking about what has happened to our lives and we're helping others get through it, and in the end, we'll seek justice for ourselves.
Yeah.
Because the
Beautiful.
day that there is a treatment for long COVID, it's over for everyone else. Once there is something that could maybe improve life for all of us,
Mm-hmm.
that is going to be a game changer. If they just found a treatment to not necessarily completely cure everything, but to make life more functional and livable,
Yeah.
you may have millions of the hardest workers you have ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
of us are bedbound and homebound and are yearning to
Yeah.
be in the streets, you know, shouting to make change for ourselves.
We have people that want to
Yeah.
do things, right? They want to do things with their body. They want to do things with their mind. They want to live, right? And they're being sidelined. So one study looked at Marines, and
Mhm.
this study of like 900 Marines basically found that about a quarter of these Marines had long COVID. These are young, healthy athletes, right? And they have to pass all these physical fitness tests
They're
um,
not chronically ill, they don't have any pre-existing conditions.
and even though the ways that they talk about long COVID might still be like, oh, loss of taste and smell, whatever, but they found that they had slower running times. Their fitness was affected, even if they weren't bedbound, even if they weren't disabled.
Yeah.
A quarter of these people who at just in this point in time had had a COVID infection. Now, how many Marines are there, right? How many have stacked up COVID infections? How many are going to suffer even more from these long hauler symptoms? And we're doing nothing about it. But also, the other interesting thing is like a third of these people had asymptomatic infections, which was devastating because people aren't even talking about that.
There was this German study that was published in February this year, and it found something pretty striking. Nearly 40% of elite athletes showed reduced performance for up to 4 months after a COVID infection. And, these weren't people with pre existing conditions or anything like that. These were healthy, high performing, Olympic level athletes. At around 16 weeks, which is roughly 4 months, 43% of them still had not regained their pre COVID performance levels, and about 64% reported that they were still limited in how much they could train or compete. And up to 20% of the athletes had to pause their training for up to 16 weeks, so 4 months, which is a long time to put your training regimen on pause as an athlete. But here's the thing, the study stopped following up with the athletes at that 16-week point, so after 4 months. So we don't actually know what happened after that. Did those athletes recover fully? Did some of them go on to develop long COVID? Did some of them become homebound or bedbound, fully disabled? And did a few have to quit their sport altogether? We just don't know. 4 months might seem like a long time, but when we're talking about post-viral recovery, that is just the beginning of the story. Most long COVID definitions say that your symptoms have to have prevailed for longer than 3 months after the infection has ended. That is just 1 month longer than your symptoms have to last to even fit into the long COVID criteria. It's difficult to really understand how prevalent long COVID is in these populations when these studies are not conducted in a way to give us that kind of information.
Yeah, I also really think it's important to touch on chronic illness in general within the artistic sports space. A lot of people have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos. POTS is common, post gymnastics. I've seen it quite a bit on social media. There's a few college gymnasts that have come forward talking about their dysautonomia journey. Laura Hernandez, 2016, Olympic gold medalist, now has POTS as well. I think it's just very interesting to see a lot of gymnasts end up with this, and it'd be nice to have a little bit more research into it.
Several elite athletes have been public about their struggle with long COVID. Nathan Icon Crumpton competes in both winter and summer Olympic events and has been sidelined while he tries to recover from long COVID. Jordan Mann is another, an elite distance runner who had to put his Olympic plans on hold. Una Cousins in the UK is a rower that had to step back from Olympic training due to her dysautonomia from long COVID. She's actually now an ambassador for the long COVID support charity, which you can find at longcovid.org. But it turns out that long haulers are much more represented among athletes.
I know, again, HEDS is a big piece of it for a lot of people, for the hypermobility and flexibility part, but even for athletes who aren't necessarily hypermobile are ending up with this.
Oh, definitely. Like hypermobility is seen as an asset in a lot of sports and gives you a competitive advantage if managed well, but can also contribute to instability and other issues. And then, COVID affects people with Ehlers-Danlos much more severely, it turns out.
I think this is really interesting. I don't think research has fully caught up with this yet. We couldn't find any specific research on why athletes have such high rates of long COVID, but we do have some assumptions. As you mentioned, hypermobility seems to play a big role. So, hypermobility, be it Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or hypermobility spectrum disorders, are considered to be a risk factor for long COVID, and about 24 to 26% of athletes are hypermobile, of course, varying by factors like sex or sport. For example, athletes in sports that emphasize flexibility and range of motion, such as gymnastics, dance, figure skating, or acrobatics, often exhibit higher rates of joint hypermobility. So that it could explain why high rates of long COVID and also POTS are found in some sports, especially the artistic sports, as you mentioned, because hypermobility is a common comorbidity of both long COVID and POTS. But I do think that athleticism itself plays a big role here as well. We know that moderate exercise, like 30 to 45 minutes of activity, is great for your immune system. It helps reduce inflammation and keeps immune defenses strong. But once you cross into that really high performance zone with long sessions, multiple workouts a day, constant travel, and stress, that can backfire. There's this thing called the open window theory, which basically means that after intense exercise, your immune system dips for a while. And that is why in sports, infection is actually the second biggest cause of missed training days, the first one being injury. So, if you catch COVID during one of those immune open windows, your body might not be fully equipped to fight it off, and that could potentially increase the risk of post viral illnesses and long COVID. But also, not giving your body enough time to rest after an infection is likely elevating the risk of long COVID. We know that there is a lot of pressure on athletes to return to training as soon as possible. You shared that yourself, Noah. But we also know that not resting enough during the acute stage can elevate the risk of developing long COVID. So, I think it's likely a mix of all these factors coming together to elevate the risk of long COVID in athletes. I do think, though, that athletes are also just more likely to notice that something is wrong in their bodies. There's this thing called detection bias, and an athlete who's in tune with their body and constantly using it is far more likely to realize early on that something is wrong. So, Noah, if we did our math right, you've been dealing with long COVID for nearly a year now. How does it feel to look back on that year?
This year was definitely the hardest one of my life to come to terms with having something that there is no absolute fix for, and the constant having to learn how to try and manage all your symptoms and all the things that are happening in your life, and trying to learn what your new triggers are. There's a lot of things that have changed for me and a lot of things that have made me feel not consistent. It was hard, but I survived every single bad day that I had, and I will continue to survive every single bad day. My life just needs to slow down a little bit more compared to some people, and that's perfectly fine too.
Yeah, learning to slow down with long COVID is so difficult, especially because we're offered so little guidance from medical professionals. And there's often so much pressure for us to be more active, to do more. There's this false idea that long COVID is deconditioning, and that if we simply went on walks and were more active, that our health would improve. But with this kind of complex chronic illness, being too active, doing too much is actually incredibly harmful.
Yeah.
But Noah, last month you spoke a lot about different treatments you tried, like HBOT therapy, ozone therapy, or working with a dietitian to help stabilize your mast cells. Have those been able to help you improve your long COVID symptoms?
Yeah, I'm grateful that I am seeing a little bit of improvement. I
Oh,
still
glad.
don't know if I completely understand the magnitude of what's happened to me and to the change in my life, and I'm still processing and grieving it. And some days it still hurts just as much as it did the first day it started happening. And some days I feel a little bit more like a pro. Like I've dealt with this. I can be okay with missing out on something, or I can be okay resting because I know that is productive and helpful for me. It's really hard when people are like, well, if you just tried to feel better, if you worked on your mental health, all your symptoms would get better. That's not how it works with the biological, like, you're literally dealing with something within your immune system and your cells
Yeah.
and your brain and your organs, like viral persistence, like,
The
yeah,
majority of us, our mental health declines because we become sick. Like being
because you have loss and grief
yeah, like
and
you're not able to socialize the way you used to. You've lost your life.
you lost everything you've ever thought you were ever going to become and be.
You learn to deal with it at some
You
point
you
because you
can't.
have to, but it's not an easy process.
No.
Yeah. So, Noah, I have one last question for you before we start wrapping up. You've probably already touched on this, but I just want to ask it anyways. What is something that feels really hard right now, and one thing that gives you hope?
Oh my gosh. That's a hard question. That's really hard. Um, Something that's really hard for me right now is fear. Fear of not knowing what's gonna happen. And that's been a pretty common thing my whole life. I get fearful pretty easily. I don't withdraw myself, but I do get scared pretty easily. And the fear of not knowing what's gonna happen to me in the future is the hardest part. I guess another hard thing is making sense of it all, processing the grief. And processing that grief is incredibly difficult just because I still don't think I understand the magnitude of what's happened. I don't entirely understand exactly how it's affected me, and I would like to know. And not just my illness, but understanding how my life traumas and what I've been through in my life, how all of this landed me to where I am today. And then one thing that gives me hope, long pause. um, I'm most hopeful for the future of us as a community because, and I say this in the kindest way, there's power in numbers. And it isn't just the people who have it right now that are going to have it.
Yeah.
I think there's just so much power in numbers, and it's sad that more people are going to get this because people aren't following precautionary measures of wearing a mask out in public and, um, clean air. But with more people, more advocacy, more change, we can hope.
Yeah. They'll have to take us seriously, right?
They will. I also am really hopeful for the research that's coming out right now. I've seen so much, I think, in the last month or so, in my opinion, that am like, oh my gosh, I'm going to send this to my provider right now.
Thank you, Noah, for joining us on our podcast and sharing your experiences. We know it's going to resonate with a lot of people out there. As a reminder, this is part 2 of Noah's experiences with long COVID. So if you want to learn more about the treatments that have helped him and his medical experiences in general, we recommend you check out our previous episode, so episode 13, Twists, Turns, and Crashes, part 1. As always, while our discussion offers medical-related insights, this is not medical advice. Always consult your healthcare team with any of your medical concerns. If you'd like to connect with our community, you'll find a link to our Discord in the show notes, along with our Substack and socials. We aim to release episodes monthly, so please subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. Until the next time, this is the COVID Long Haulers podcast signing off. See you on the next one.